So what if Gideon Moi is going to be on the ballot for the 2022 presidential elections? So what? The man has no influence in the Rift Valley. DP Ruto is king in the Rift Valley. Therefore, the conclusion of most analysts is that this latest development means zero, should be ignored. I don't agree at all. Indeed, this is a very significant move, which tells us a lot. For those of us on this channel who read politics a lot more deeply than most, this is a very significant move. And on our show today, we will see why it is so important and what exactly it tells us some very shocking things that we should expect. And also what it suggests about what is happening in backrooms. You know, in politics, the most significant moves are made away from the public eye, in private meetings, at night, or even during the day. Whispered conversations, somewhere. And when those same politicians are interviewed on television or on radio, they tell us nothing. And therefore, I can assure you, you're in for quite a number of shockers on our show today. So stay with me till the end. But before we get started, I have a message that should be of great interest to many on this channel. Now, we are rapidly approaching that time of the year when many go back to the village to see our relatives back home in the rural areas and to see how they're doing. Some of us travel from countries which are very far away, the US, Europe, etc., etc. But when you reach a rural area, you can't even charge your smartphone. And therefore, a very viable option we should all consider is solar. And what I would highly recommend is that you seek professionals when installing solar in your rural home. Professionals like Power Africa Solar. You know, in the past, solar has had a bad name in some parts of Kenya because people think it's just a matter of putting up solar panels on the roof. Jua iko nyingi. No. This thing involves calculations to determine the number of solar panels you need. Because with the correct calculation by professionals, you can even power that house of yours in Nairobi, so that when there's a power outage, you're okay. Everything in your huge mansion runs as usual until the power people sort themselves out. And I think most of us are aware that power outages don't just happen in Africa. Anyway, I recommend you visit the powerafricasolar.com website. You can start there, get a quotation, and get things going. Let's give our rural folk something to really smile about as we head towards the end of the year. Now, Power Africa Solar have offices in Nairobi, Mombasa, and Kisumu. And there's some very good news for those of us who are in the United States. You can contact the US office, get quotations, make payments, organize everything from there for your rural folk in Kenya. Now, is that convenient or what? Because we all know about the issues of sending money home for certain projects. Let me just leave it at that. Deal with the professionals, Power Africa Solar, and see the difference. Right. Let's get this show on the road. Now, I get it. I get it why most people have forgotten that we're in that stage of the presidential elections that happens all over the world, known as the primaries. In Kiswahili, mchujo. This is where all kinds of candidates for the presidency present themselves. Now, I know why Kenyans are confused this time round. It's because the primaries actually kicked off in 2018. Immediately after the elections, the 2017 presidential elections. Just a few weeks later, the presidential primaries in Kenya kicked off. Yeah, and of course, the first candidate to present himself was William Samoei Ruto, our current deputy president. And his campaign from that time has been relentless, continuous, consistent. And let nobody claim that I'm bashing the deputy president. I'm just stating facts. Anyway, these are the primaries. We have people like Jimmy Wanjigi, now Gideon Moi. We have Alfred Mutua. We have outgoing Mombasa Governor, Ali Hassan Joho, etc., etc. There are many candidates. And if I can further remind you, what is supposed to happen is that as the presidential elections draw closer, some presidential candidates will form alliances with others, while others will go all the way through to the elections. We will also have other presidential candidates who will not form alliances, but will continue solo right up to the elections. And yet they have a deal with one of the major presidential candidates. Let me explain. You could be a presidential candidate and you know you're not going to get any votes from a certain area. But you know your opponent will make a clean sweep. You're your main challenger for the presidency. So what do? You sponsor a solo candidate for the presidency who will steal votes away from your opponent in that particular area. Reduce their votes, which will help you ultimately. You remember in 2013, Musalia Mudavadi was a presidential candidate, but his campaign was very puzzling because he focused a lot on Western Kenya, where he was supposed to reduce the votes of Raila Odinga. I'm sure you get my drift. And I think many of you have seen now, where the candidature of one Gideon Moi in the 2022 presidential race deserves closer analysis. But let me start by saying that in my view, I don't think the idea here is to reduce the deputy president's votes in the Rift Valley. I don't think so. If we follow the trends in recent presidential elections, that strategy doesn't appear to work very well in Kenya. And that is why the last time it was tried was in 2013. But let us look at it from another angle. You're a leading presidential candidate, and you make a deal with certain influential people in certain regions of the country to declare their interest in the presidency. And you don't do this in all regions, because the strategy should be different for each region for a serious presidential candidate. You can't have a uniform strategy across the country. And so these individuals launch their campaigns, and all of them are, of course, reminding their supporters that they will not, play second fiddle to any presidential candidate. Now, one of the things that will happen is that when a region already has a presidential candidate, it will be very difficult for any other presidential candidate to come into that region and make an impact. Usually, not all the time, but usually. And if that region has more than one presidential candidate, they have two, then what will happen? Even if one of the presidential candidates does not have much influence, what will happen is that this other weaker candidate will disrupt the campaign of the other stronger candidate. It will no longer be smooth sailing for the stronger candidate. And very important, this other candidate is on the ground every day, campaigning against that other presidential hopeful from the same community. There's no substitute to being on the ground, to being right there where all the action is happening. It is very easy for you to see weaknesses in the other stronger candidate's campaign. It is easy for you to see opportunities for taking away votes from the very strong presidential candidate you're facing in that particular region. And then as we head closer to the elections, the primaries end. And they end when these other influential presidential candidates in various communities all gang up and declare their support for a particular presidential candidate. Joe in Mombasa, Gideon Moi in the Rift Valley, Alfred Mutua in the Kamba Nation, Musalia Mudavadi in the Luhya Nation, etc., etc. I know you now understand what I'm driving at. We know that Gideon Moi is family in Team Keleweke. There's no doubt about that one. We also know that the KANU party, which Gideon Moi heads, has some influence in the Rift Valley, especially in vote-rich Baringo, where Gideon Moi is the senator currently. He is the senator on a KANU ticket. And there's another super interesting development elsewhere that I believe is linked to this latest move by Gideon Moi. Have you heard that there's a very strong move within Parliament to fight for the creation of the Prime Minister's post? Yes, that was in the BBI. Now that is a very interesting carrot to dangle in front of voters in a region. Yet another very tempting carrot to dangle in front of voters is the position of Deputy Prime Minister. What am I saying? What I am saying is that I believe Gideon Moi has already been earmarked for one of those positions when Team Keleweke finally announces its lineup. I am suspecting Deputy Prime Minister, if not Prime Minister. Now think about that for a minute. It is okay for some analysts to say this has zero impact on the upcoming elections. Yeah, and to write it off and to dismiss it. But the reality, the political reality, is that Gideon Moi's latest move tells us a lot. There is something else very shocking this move tells us. And I have to choose my words carefully. It suggests that Gideon Moi in 2022 may be the only major presidential candidate who at the last minute steps down to support another presidential hopeful in the Rift Valley. That means there will be nobody else, no other major candidate from the Rift Valley in 2022. That is how I read this move. At least that is the thinking of the people who are putting this together intricately, slowly, while they leave the rest of us guessing and confused. Yeah, they're going ahead with their plans. And obviously they know something that the rest of us do not know. But even assuming that this is not true, this does not happen, and that we have another major candidate from the Rift Valley, say the Deputy President, Gideon Moi's presence in the primaries will still serve a major purpose. It means that if Gideon Moi's side, the side is allied to Team Keleweke, wins the presidential elections in 2022, this important region of Kenya, the Rift Valley, will not feel left out of the new government. The region will still feel part and parcel of the government, even those who will not have voted for Gideon Moi's side. And I believe that is very important. After 2022, unity of the country will be very important after the 2022 presidential elections. Of course, there are those of us who don't think this is important. All they're interested in is their candidate winning the presidential election. Tutajisort later, after we have won. This is the thinking of some. In my view, that is very irresponsible thinking. That is the kind of thinking that ignores the political reality in our country. That's just me. That's my view. I'm sure many of you don't agree, and that's okay. That's the thing about democracy. You could be very wrong, very naive in pursuing your political ambitions, but still you're well within your rights in a democracy. There are those of us who are very convinced that Kenya is the US. Yeah. And there are those who don't care. Yeah. Their thinking is that as long as we win the election, it is okay, we'll have state machinery. State machinery will sort out everybody else. Of course, these people are forgetting what happened in 2017. In 2017, did state machinery sort out the issues? Just try and remember. They didn't. In fact, things were so bad that it necessitated a handshake, to bring back peace, some semblance of peace and tranquility into the country, so that people would go about their businesses. I'm just reminding you. I know some of you don't even want to be reminded. In my view, I believe Gideon Moi's campaign for the presidency will help some people in the Rift Valley come back to their senses. Although the senator is not influential in the entire region, that is true, I believe his campaign will help people to start smelling the coffee. Because what some people are pushing for in our country at the moment is just madness. I can't find any other English word to describe it. Sample the following. Only 2 communities have had the presidency since independence. And the country is well over 55 years old. And so if some people had their way, Kenya would have a president from these 2 communities for 100 years. Yet we have 40 other communities in the country. Mnataka kutuambia mwanamke Mpokoma hawezi kuzaa president? Mwanamke Mluhya hawezi kuzaa president wa Kenya? Mwanamke Mkamba hawezi? Get serious. Even if you ignore what I'm saying, the political reality is that when we head closer to the elections, these other 40 communities will not accept what some people are trying to sell to us. They won't. In my view, and wait for this one, the 2022 elections will have very little, if anything, to do with the House of Mumbi and the Kalenjin community. This election will be decided by the 40 other communities we have in the country. And in a way, this is going to be very sad for the very viable candidates who hail from those 2 communities, who are ripe for the presidency. It's going to be very sad for them. But that is the political reality. It is too much. Over half a decade of 2 communities only in the presidency, and you want to tell us that you want us to go on heading towards 100 years of only 2 communities in the presidency? Think about it. Is that realistic? Is that something that can fly? I find it super interesting that the politicians who understand this very well currently are quiet. They're very quiet. They're not talking about it because they know when the time comes. When we go into the last stretch of the campaigns, watu watashangaa. Many of us have even forgotten that in 2017, there were people talking about secession. Dividing Kenya into more than 1 nation, into 2 nations. With those communities who want to be president forever in one country, and then the rest of us in the other country. What short memories we have as Kenyans. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha. Feeling discouraged and just about to give up? There was a time that the nation of Japan was in precisely that situation. But their turnaround was so spectacular that many people find it difficult to believe that a nation that is so rich today was very desperate not too long ago. Their main secret was in a killer strategy known as creative imitation. This is where you copy an idea and make improvements. The Chinese are using exactly the same strategy today, but focusing on making their products as cheap as possible. The great news is that you too can use the same strategy to change your situation in a very spectacular way. Watch the video now on the Kumekucha Chris channel on YouTube, which not only gives you more information, but reveals where you can get tried and tested ideas to copy immediately.